In progress.
It still makes me laugh.
I
I'm not
know.
quite sure why.
I think you have to continue.
I wish we had somebody else's voice on that, just kind of like saying something. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe we should just record our own thing for it, Kathy.
Are there only 5 of us?
Recording
Okay.
is in progress.
It's already happened.
It's happening.
Okay. How's it looking? Hi, Betty.
I see everyone. Diane Becker's here.
Or
Oh,
we can have
yeah.
a song by Jimmy for recording by
He's
your husband.
downstairs right now too. I was trying to get him to play live for us,
Oh, that'd be awesome.
but he said I have to practice. I haven't played the Feedback Friday song in a while. I was like, are you out of your mind?
He's such a professional.
It's like, I don't want to look bad in front of all those Feedback Friday people, but maybe we can get him up here. I'll get him to consider it. Kathy Green.
Okay. How we doing, Amy?
Lots of people still coming in. I think
Are
we
they?
should give it just a minute or two. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Oh. Yep. Yep. So this presentation I did yesterday, the people weren't fast enough letting people in. And I started letting people in. And it wasn't
Amy, you're
even my
such a
job.
control freak.
I felt like a control freak. Like, why are
No,
you
that
so
is control
behind?
freak behavior, believe
Come
me.
on, just let them in. Don't let them sit there. There's important things to hear. For
Do you
God's
think that they
sakes.
even notice?
They didn't. People were just sitting there. I was like, why aren't they letting them in?
You're funny.
And now I've now discovered the participants like ticker going up. Okay. I'm not
Yeah.
gonna look at that.
Yes,
Don't
no,
look
don't look at that, Jeanette.
Don't
No,
look at it.
Oh, Lord.
do not look at
Look
that
it,
number.
Jeanette.
It's a fake number.
The fake
Yeah.
number. Look at all
Yeah.
these people laughing though. See, I told you.
Kathy
these
is
are-
a smart woman and she hired somebody who could take care of business. And that's
Yeah.
why you're hired there. And
Yeah,
that's why
that's
you
my
get to do
job.
that great job. Yeah.
That's right.
That's why, like, I'm constantly looking to the right because I'm just admitting people. Admit.
Mhm.
Kathy, you want to try something new today?
Okay. What?
Kathy, just look at the green light when you're talking.
Okay. Like
Kathy,
that.
just keep looking at the green light talking.
Oh, yes. I'm still looking at the green light, but everything is out
But I
of
want to look
focus
at you
now.
too, but I'm looking at the green light.
And everything is completely out of
Letting people in.
focus. I can't even. Okay, let's get started.
All right, just got motion sickness on that. Ugh.
There you go. I'll let them in.
All right, and make sure everybody's muted.
Oh, yeah. Everyone, please mute.
Please unmute yourself. Dorothy Yuki, that means you.
Okay, we're good. Oh, I muted Amy. Sorry, Amy.
I was just telling Dorothy that Dorothy's the name of my chicken. Okay.
I am just on a,
You got that, Kathy? Am I muted? Oh, hold on.
Well, it's the end of the week. Now where you been? Well, now it's Feedback Friday, so come on in. Come sit down and stare at your screen. We got a presenter that you never seen. We're Feedback Friday, we're on the loose. We'll be the train, you be the caboose. It's Feedback Friday with Kathy and Amy. Mashed potatoes and the gravy. It's Feedback Friday all day long. Feedback, feedback, Feedback Friday.
There we go. I'm basically failing at all jobs here. I'm trying to admit people and do the announcements, but hello, everyone. How are you? It's Friday. Oh, everyone's waving. How cute.
Oh, that's cute. Yeah, look at you. Look at everybody.
Yeah.
Yay.
Yeah, this is episode 78. 78. That's amazing. Welcome to Feedback Friday. I'm Kathy Hattori, president of Botanical Colors, and joining me is Amy Dufault, the director of communications and sustainability. And together we are so pleased that you're joining us for episode 78 of Feedback Friday, our weekly show where we speak with artists, dyers, foragers, activists, scientists, writers, scholars. I mean, pretty much anybody who has an interest in natural color, the natural world, and all the stuff that we're interested in. So we're so pleased that you're joining us. And today's program, we're really happy to welcome Jeannet Leendertse. Jeanette's from Maine, but before that, she'll tell you a little bit about how she got to the US. And she uses seaweed to create structural forms inspired by the rugged coast of Maine. So it's amazing to see the beauty and the variety of the seaweed that she uses and the shapes and how she's taking this material from nature and just making something amazing from it. So we're very, very happy that she's joining us. And she's looking at both the seaweed itself as well as the ecosystem of our oceans. I think she has some interesting things to talk to us about today. Amy recently met her at the Cahoon Museum on Cape Cod and kind of like snagged her to join us. So we're really happy that she agreed to do that. Before we start, I just want to say thank you, everyone. It has been a year. It's still being a year. Probably going to be a year next year too. We couldn't do this without you. We're so happy that you participate. We get feedback from Feedback Friday from you guys. It's just been amazing. So thank you very much. We couldn't do it without your support, your help, and it just keeps us going. Before we start, no, we already did that one. For housekeeping, Amy is going to be our moderator and she will monitor the chat once it's open. Also, we ask that you stay muted for the duration of Jeanette's presentation. And then after that, and after we have the Q&A via chat, then we'll open it up for everyone to say hello. And the call is being recorded, as you noticed. We'll have a copy ready for you once Amy posts it on the website. So now we're just going to segue into the presentation. Jeanette, thank you for joining us. Welcome. And we can't wait to hear what you have to say.
Jeanette, you have to
Mute.
unmute. Yeah,
Okay,
there you
all
go.
right. So I'll start sharing my screen. Here we go. Is that working? Can everybody
Yep,
see this?
Looks
All
great.
right. Well, so thank you very much, Amy and Kathy, for having me on Feedback Friday. It was great to be snagged at the Cahoon Museum, as you mentioned. To be honest, I was not aware of Feedback Friday, and I have a lot of catching up to do because so much great stuff has been recorded. So really looking forward to seeing all of that. So so I'm hoping today to talk to you about my work, about my seaweed work, and how I came to use seaweed as a craft material, really. So just to get started. Well, sort of one of the first questions that people tend to ask when I start telling them that I use seaweed as a craft material or rockweed as a craft material, they go like, "Oh my God, like how smelly is that?" And it actually isn't, because what I've discovered is when I leave the seaweed wet and salty and cold, just as I find it, and work with it in that state, it actually smells nice and briny. And then when you dry it all at once, it holds on to a bit of that briny smell, but it doesn't start to smell fishy or sulfury at all. And that is because it doesn't get to decompose, you know, so you don't get that thing that you get on a hot, humid day at low tide on the beach. So I just wanted to answer that question or address that because it's like the most asked question ever. Let's see. So I grew up on the Dutch coast, which is where I'm from. I grew up in the Netherlands, and the coastline looks quite a bit different there from the Maine coastline. The beaches are wide and sandy, but a lot of the sounds and the smells and even some of the seaweed is the same. So I grew up in the Netherlands, which is this tiny red country that you see here in the middle of Europe on the left side. So not the big one, Russia, but the tiny one. As you can see, we are surrounded by ocean on the north and the west by the North Sea. If you look to the right, you see the country enlarged. And if you look at the bottom there, you see a blue province called Zeeland. And it actually literally means sea land. And so that's where I grew up. You can see that it's sort of a collection of sort of loosely connected islands. A little bit more about my background in terms of career. I come from a working class family, and so art school didn't really seem like the most practical of choices. So I actually had a nursing career first, then eventually ended up at an art school anyway, but I chose graphic design as a more practical direction. As part of that program, I ended up in New York City for an internship. And even though I briefly returned to the Netherlands to finish my studies, I basically never really completely left. I loved being in the US. And from New York, I went to Boston, where I worked for the MIT Press design department. And after that, I actually started my own graphic design business, and I designed books for many years, actually right up until 2014, sort of, when I started to focus more on fiber arts. As my two sons became more independent, I felt I could sort of move away from the income that my graphic design provided. And I started working with fabrics. As we were living in the Boston area, my family and I would spend summers in Maine. And every summer we sort of moved up a little further north, it seemed. We would rent a house and sort of explore the area until we ended up on the peninsula of Blue Hill. And if you've never been, I highly recommend it. It's stunning. The area is just stunning. And it's actually still sort of undiscovered. A lot of people drive right by it on their way to Acadia National Park. And the area has a lot of the beauty of Acadia National Park, but not the crowds. So it's just, yeah, amazing place. Here's a photograph I took on the southern tip of the peninsula. You can see how beautiful the area is. The beaches are rocky, not sandy. A lot of the landscape was created during the last ice age. So there's a lot of erratics, large rocks, which make a perfect attachment point for seaweeds, like rockweed. So this is one of my favorite beaches on the Blue Hill Peninsula. It's called Fly Point. And I spend a lot of time there photographing my work. As I started sort of moving away from graphic design, I first stayed closely to graphics, and I started printing graphics on fabrics, and you can see an example of that in the upper left corner. And then as time went on, I started making accessories instead of books. And my work got more and more influenced by the Maine coastal environment, the marine environment. I started taking the things that I made back to the beach and photographing them, and more and more of the color and the shapes of the environment sort of seeped into the work. I took some classes in Shibori in England. I took some classes at Haystack in Maine. Yeah, I just started developing sort of a fiber vocabulary, if you can call it that. Yeah, as I sort of kept on exploring in fibers, I kind of noticed that my work became more and more about the environment, really, sort of in two ways. In that, you know, the environment as sort of a place to belong in, to adapt to feel connected with. And as a first generation immigrant, I think those sort of thoughts and feelings are never far from your mind. And secondary, the environment as just this incredible thing that we just need to protect, you know, that we need to really take care of it in order to find ourselves there, and feel like we have a place to go to, especially during times of COVID. So back to seaweed. So why seaweed? Well, when you're on the Blue Hill Peninsula, it's hard to ignore it, because it's like it's all around you. And part of me was already thinking about moving away from the materials that I was using, just because it's so difficult to know where things are coming from. Like if you order a material from a fabric or anything online and it's shipped to you, you just have no idea what the history of that material is, and what the impact was on the environment. As I started trying to use rockweed, I thought I had to keep it in its wet and pliable shape or state. And I spent a lot of time looking for recipes and all kinds of things online, like how can I preserve it? How can I keep it flexible? Sort of all of that failed. I ended up with slimy, stinky messes. And I was just like, okay, I guess there's a reason why people are not using seaweed. It sort of doesn't work. So I gave up on it for a while. And then one day I came to the beach and I saw this bunch of seaweed that had washed up on shore, dried, and it was sort of in a nest-like shape. And I suddenly had this thought, like, okay, there's strength in numbers. You know, if it dries brittle, but is attached to one another, then maybe I can create some structure with it. So I took some seaweed home and I started working with it. Here you can see, you know, how thick the layer of seaweed is that is actually on the beach. It can be several feet thick, and it's just this dense carpet in which a lot of tiny wildlife survives, you know, in the time between high and low tide. Here you can see how the rockweed actually connects to the rock. it looks like it has roots, but they're not roots like with a regular plant. The rockweed does not get any nutrition from the rock. It gets all its nutrition from the ocean. And in that sense, it does us all a great favor, because as it absorbs CO2 from the ocean, it absorbs CO2 from the atmosphere, because it goes from the atmosphere into the ocean and then gets absorbed by the rockweed, by the seaweed. And when pieces of rockweed or big chunks of rockweed get ripped off during heavy storms, they float back into the ocean, then sink eventually to the bottom of the ocean. And that's CO2 is in that way sequestered. It lays at the bottom of the ocean and is trapped there basically, and taken out of the cycle. So here I can show you a little bit more about how the individual rockweed plant looks like. So it has a holdfast at the bottom instead of roots. Then it has sort of a main branch called the thallus. And then it has side branches and these air vesicles or air bladders. And they're pretty interesting, because what they do is they make sure that the seaweed floats up. So when the tide comes in, the seaweed no longer lays on the bottom. It floats up and becomes this underwater forest, which is really amazing. And a lot of tiny creatures hide in it, make it their home. They survive in it at low tide, because the seaweed layers, deep layers, stay cool and wet. So it's a very important habitat and environment for many species. Another interesting factoid is that the air bladders, the growth between air bladders, indicate the amount of growth in a year. So you can actually kind of count the air bladders and figure out how old a plant is. So here you can how the seaweed just moves with the streaming of the ocean, with the tides, and becomes this underwater forest that I was referring to. And as I was learning more about seaweed, I became aware of the Rockweed Coalition, and their goal is to protect seaweed, from being over-harvested. And you might say, hey, wait a minute, who is using seaweed, or what is seaweed being harvested for? I'm not aware of this. Well, seaweed actually has always been harvested, but in small amounts, just by the local people. They put it on their land, they use it as a fertilizer. They might use it as sort of a live bubble wrap, if you want to believe that, to sort of pack lobsters or add some to a clam bake to add more flavor. So it's always been used. But lately, more and more of it is being harvested, and it is turned into thickener for paints and dyes. It is used as nutritional additives in human food and pet food. It is being used on a larger scale as fertilizer and shipped out to other parts of the country. And that's where it might become problematic. Currently, only 1% of seaweed in Maine is being harvested. And scientists tell us that we could basically harvest up to maybe 17% because it regenerates really fairly quickly. And, you know, it's used to having pieces broken off and, you know, things flowing, you know, being and sort of regrowing. That said, as humans, we don't really have a good track record, I think, using natural resources. And I think we need to think about how this is being done and by whom, because I think small local efforts are fine because they have always taken place, and the seaweed has been able to keep up with that. But I think when it comes to big corporations coming in with machines and boats that, or machines on boats that actually cut off and suck up a lot of the seaweed, it becomes a different story altogether. And it just makes me think of, you know, how we've been dealing with the jungle, and, you know, that we have another chance here to do better than that. We need to do much, much better than that, and actually protect this underwater forest. So here you can see just two little habitants here in the middle of the slide. On the right side, you see two little periwinkles in the middle. They're like these little snails, and they're just one of the many, many creatures that take advantage of rockweed, especially at low tide when they stay nice and wet and cool in the layers of seaweed. So when I harvest seaweed for my project, I'm extremely cautious as to where I harvest, or harvest is too big a word, I should say forage, because I use very little. And I always make sure I leave 16 inches of the plant intact, of the algae intact, so it can easily regenerate. And I spread out where I forage. I just try to be really respectful of the environment. So here you can see me selecting some of the seaweed, and you can see how long these branches really are, and how easy it is to leave a lot of the plant intact and still have a lot of material to work with. I've sort of discovered that rockweed they're a little like families, in the sense that some patches show rockweed with very wide branches and flattened air vesicles, whereas other plants have just very thin branches and more round air vesicles. So I sometimes think of them as families, you know, where we all know families that are sort of stocky with like tiny heads, and then other families might be like tall and lanky with large heads. So heads. So that's sort of how I think of it. There's just an enormous amount of variety when you start looking at it closely. So here you can see what I do when I take the seaweed home. I sort of separate side branches from the main branches so that I have these long strands, individual strands to work with. And I use as much of the plant as of the algae as I possibly can. And the little fine branches that I cannot use, I actually put right in the garden and use them as compost. So here you can see at the bottom what happens to the rockweed when it dries. And that's what I was referring to earlier when I kind of didn't know how to use it, because as it dries, it becomes like very brittle, and it's tricky. It gets fragile. So to go back to this moment when I found this sort of nest-like shape on the beach that was all dried up, because that gave me the idea, okay, if there's strength in numbers, maybe if I attach a lot of these branches to one another when they're wet and then they dry, we create like strength in numbers, and I can actually create a structure that is strong enough to make like a vessel or an object with. So this is like my very first seaweed experiment. So I took just some branches home and stitched them together and let them dry. And this is what it looked like. And then I started to explore, what kind of thread works best. And I landed on waxed linen, mostly because the wax really helps pulling the thread through the seaweed, and at the same time the wax also just sort of grips the tissue, because sometimes I feel like a surgeon in a way, because you're sort of working with this almost live tissue, and it feels like you're making sutures or something. I sort of extra double wax the wax linen to give it even more of that quality. And you can see the density of stitches that is required to create a sturdy basket. So as you can see, it's quite a time-consuming process. Making a basket can take months, really, the large size ones. So here you can see one of the amazing qualities of seaweed that, are completely make sense, but still for some strange reason came as a surprise to me. And that is that you can actually rehydrate the seaweed. I mean, it clearly evolved to withstand the tides. So the top layer will dry out at low tide. But I find that if I make a vessel and I don't like the way the shape dried, I can, even after many, many weeks, submerge my work into called salty water and reshape it. It actually, this is an actual example. This little rosette was dried and then sort of brought back to life by putting it back in water. And you can actually do this weeks and months after the piece is finished. So that's a pretty amazing quality. Just, it's so resilient. So even though seaweed as a species is like over 3 billion years old, it was recently added to the Future Materials Bank, which is a collaboration between the Jan van Eyck Academy in the Netherlands and Central St. Martin's in London. And it's a very cool resource. And if you are a craftsperson, I highly recommend visiting it. Visiting this link, because it shows just a number of materials that artists have invented or come up with that are all ecologically sound, and many of them take advantage of the industrial waste stream. So if you, as a craft person, are looking to make your work more sustainable, then maybe you can find inspiration or there. Lots of great ideas there. So here I worked with horsehair actually as a thread, because I kind of wanted to explore what happened when I used a thinner thread. Because when the seaweed dries, a lot more of the thread becomes visible and you sort of get a lace-like effect. And clearly, if you vary the weight of your thread, you get a different lace effect. So here, this slide shows a little bit more of what that lace effect looks like when the basket is dry. So the light sort of comes through nicely. So far I sort of developed two different ways of working with rockweed. In the top example, I'm using, well, if you think of sort of the individual rockweed branches as ribbon, in the top example, I'm sort of putting the ribbon on its side and then stitch it together like that. And then so you get this sort of rhythm of stitches. For the bottom example, I use the ribbon sort of flat on top of one another and I stitch it on the inside. And so the effect is quite different and you get the more sort of undulating feel of the rockweed itself. And I find it very reminiscent of the ocean. So here is a basket that I made, and it's sort of inspired by Japanese pottery. I used a found item. I used some driftwood here as a handle to complete it. Here I'm combining the two techniques. So I'm combining the outside stitch technique with the inside stitch technique that I sort of explained earlier. For this one, I used a handle that was made with a different type of seaweed. It was made with the thallus of kelp, which dries a little bit stronger than the individual rockweed branch. So this is something I want to explore further and see if I can maybe use kelp more in my future work. And then finally we come to color. I know botanical colors is a lot about color, and as you know, when I forage the seaweed, it's various shades of green, depending on the time of year. It actually turns a golden yellow in the fall, but when you dry it, it becomes black, no matter where you started. But then I started seeing washed up seaweed on the shore becoming, again, different colors, so becoming orangey and red. And I was like, what is this all about? Does this have to do with like runoff or, and so I started asking some questions about it. And it's actually a well-known phenomenon called sun bleaching. And so I've come to discover that after the seaweed dries and becomes black, if you then expose it to sunlight or to light, it starts changing color again, and it can become these type of shades. And that's something I want to experiment with more by maybe partially exposing my work to bright sunlight while covering other parts up, so to get variety in color that way. So that's the next thing I want to look into. So that's kind of an exciting next thing to explore. So for this vessel, I just kept stitching and stitching and stitching. And I was just thinking about, like, I don't know, how much of your arm would you be willing to give up when you would reach into a strange, tall vessel like that? It's sort of a mysterious and yeah, sort of alien material. Here you can see how pliable the work is when it is still wet. And so when I sew all of it together, it's very drapey, and I actually shape it by filling it with paper towels that I use over and over and over again. And I sort of, yeah, sculpt it in a way. until it has the shape I want it to dry in. And then the seaweed just does its own thing, because even though I shape it, you can't quite control how it dries. And so it sort of gets a very unique character by just taking on unexpected shapes, which forms, which I really, really like. So this vessel I made as part of an assignment from an outfit called Steinbeisser. And it's another interesting organization to look into as a craftsperson, for a craftsperson, because what they do is they bring celebrity chefs and craftspeople together, and with the goal of making a dining experience just a very slow and thoughtful, unique and different, and maybe even a challenging experience. So they asked me to develop the bread baskets for their next event. And so I started thinking about, well, what is a bread basket? You know, when you go out to dinner and they put that bread basket in the middle of the table, it frequently just doesn't have enough bread in it for everybody. You're kind of hungry, you feel a little awkward reaching for it, like, is this piece mine? Should I take it? Anyway, I was just thinking about this reaching in, and I thought, why not make it even more awkward and more self-conscious by having to reach into this weird beast of a thing, and having to fish your bread, you know, basically out of the belly of it. I know this sounds crazy. I invite you to look up Steinbeisser.org. They have videos of their dinner events, and I'm sure it will become a lot more clear when you see some of their videos there. The utensils and dinnerware that craftspeople have made are incredible. You know, your spoon might be connected to your neighbor's spoon, and you might have to collaborate with other people at your table just to even get the food to your mouth. So it's quite an interesting idea, and I like the fact that they really want to slow down the whole dining experience. And I think we all need slowing down, and me sewing seaweed is an extreme form of slowing down. Anyway, so here is one other basket that was inspired by these erratics that you see on the Maine coast. The shapes are just magnificent, and so I was trying to get some of those forms into my work. So I'm just hoping that that my work stands on its own, but at the same time, I really want it to remind people of this natural resource that seaweed is, and you know, that we should protect it, that we should think about it, like, how do we use it? How much of it do we use? And you know, that it helps protect our coastline, not just by sequestering CO2, but directly as well, because it sort of functions as a buffer for our rising tides. So it is such an important resource in so many ways. And I think if we could just think about it a little bit more, and not do the same thing to the underwater forest as what we have done to the on-land forest, then I think we will all be in much better shape. So thank you for your time and yeah, listening to me going on and on about seaweed.
That was great. It's so fascinating. Thank you, Jeanette. Okay, I'm gonna kick off the questions because I have a question. So we have now had two people from the Netherlands talk about seaweed to
Yes,
us. Do you have that book, Ninka's book?
I don't have it, but I do want to get it. I do want
Yeah,
to.
we'll send you one.
Yes. Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
but
did show up with the cahoon with it, remember?
okay, good. Um, so does the Netherlands have, and the Dutch people, do they have a culture of actually eating seaweed the way that Japan, Korea, China, other parts of Asia do?
No, we don't.
No,
We don't.
but you
And
have a
I,
fascination with it, it seems.
yeah, well, I think it's just, we are a below sea level country, so there's a lot of thinking about global warming and a
Yeah.
lot of thinking about rising, tides. But I also think, we're always looking towards the ocean. Are we safe from it? And how yeah, what does it mean? What
Mhm.
does it do for us? But yeah,
So
no, it's not it's
heightened awareness then.
heightened awareness. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Amy, go for it.
Thanks. Okay, I'm just gonna dive in. So somebody's asking, what size are these pots and vessels?
They vary in size. I started out fairly small. Well, maybe, I don't know. My smallest ones are maybe like 6 inches diameter or something. But the big bread basket is probably, I would say 20 inches or so, or 24 inches diameter. So I'm starting to go bigger. One of the issues is that as I mentioned before, it takes a long time to do all that stitching. And I have to keep it all cold and wet, for which I use a large cooler that I just replenish with cooling elements, that you just use in your regular cooler when you cool your beer. But I mean, it needs to be manageable. I would love to make large, like one of my ideas is to make these long vertical columns that hang down from the ceiling that are made out of seaweed, so you can almost feel like you're among it, like you're in the seaweed forest. I don't know. Yeah.
That idea, that's cool. It'd be a really cool installation to have something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I liked when you were at the Cahoon Museum, when you showed up with said cooler that usually is used for beer.
Yeah.
With your wet,
You're right. It's not
with
in
your
the
wet seaweed.
image, but it's right to my side here. So yeah.
That was fun.
Yeah.
Let's see, maybe I missed it, but how wet is it when she sews it? Does she rinse the salt water off?
I don't rinse the salt water off because you don't have to. It's not super dripping. It's just sort of moist. And so I use just sort of some plastic that I put on the table, some sheets that I put on the table, and I just work on top of that, and it doesn't drip or anything. I just keep it moist. Sometimes I use old towels that I dampen and I sort of wrap around sections that I'm not working on, just to keep it moist. Yeah.
A couple people have asked if you are teaching any classes at all in Maine, because they also live in Maine. There was somebody from Brooklyn that's on this too. So do you ever teach classes, or have you thought about doing that?
I haven't done that yet. It's definitely something that's on my mind. I've gotten some questions via Instagram and Facebook about that too. I'm currently in the process of building a studio in Maine, and my husband and I hope to move there permanently in the spring. And I have a lot more space there. I'm currently I don't have the space for it right now. But I hope to at least invite people to my studio and yeah, maybe even teach some classes. I would love to meet more fiber artists in Maine for sure, because yeah, that would be great.
Exciting. Well, I'll meet at your place, okay?
Sure.
And we'll have some bread. But-
Yes.
Yeah.
Out of the creepy basket.
We'll be tethered together, natural dyeing and
Yeah,
eating
with
bread.
the two-ended spoon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Give it to me, Kathy. Yeah. Let's see. Has Jeanette ever worked with seaweed soaked in glycerin to keep it pliable permanently?
I tried the glycerin, and that was the earlier process that I was talking about. I made this mixture of glycerin and something else, I don't know, alcohol, rubbing alcohol, I think, was in it, and some other ingredients, and it was supposed to keep the seaweed pliable. And I tried it, but I don't know, maybe I'm doing something wrong, but it became this incredibly slimy, stinky mess, and I just gave up on it. And I figured I can use it wet and just let it dry and not use anything at all. And that feels wonderful, really, that that by using only the hemp thread and the wax, the beeswax, I feel I'm as close to making something that has very little impact on the environment as I possibly can. I guess that's sort of where I end up. Yeah.
Somebody's asking if you've ever used other materials from the sea, from other shores.
Not so far, but as I said, I want to explore what I can possibly do with kelp. And the big reason for that is, rockweed is a perennial, so it's not easily farmed. So rockweed is a resource that's out there, and there's a lot of it, but people are not really farming it. Kelp is being farmed, and it's a very interesting phenomenon, because it's sometimes farmed together with mussels, and it actually helps both crops, and it's farmed for carbon sequester, for its, to sequester more carbon, because some of it falls down to the ocean bottom, and so some of the carbon gets taken out of the cycle. And so I definitely want to look into what can I do with kelp. So I want to sort of connect with some kelp farmers and see, if I can collaborate with them.
That'll be the first here on Feedback Friday that somebody said, I want to collaborate with kelp farmers. So kelp farmers, we've got somebody who wants to collaborate with you. Okay, Diane, good question. Have you ever used weaving techniques with this material?
I have not, but there is a lady in France who uses not this type of seaweed, but more, I think maybe it's a more stringy type of seaweed. And she does weave with it. And I can email you a link to her work. Very interesting. She had an exhibition, or she was part of an exhibition at the Cooper Hewitt in New York, maybe a year or so ago. Yeah.
Yep. When afterwards, I'll get all these links from you, because people are asking about the future materials and the food
Sure.
one. So I'll get all the links, everybody, and make sure it's in the
I
video
will
post.
email
So
this to you.
don't worry about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see. For projects that take days or months to complete, do you simply rehydrate the seaweed whenever it starts to dry out?
I could do that, but I don't, because that takes a waiting period every single time, and you then need to submerge it. So I keep it in the cooler, and I keep it sort of wrapped in salty wet towels, and I keep it cold, and so I find that easier than drying and hydrating it all the time. But it's true that if I start working bigger, you know, I would need to do it in different ways. I have, you know, when the bread basket was getting really big, I was sort of at some point storing it upside down in a bucket, so that for a little bit outside in the cold, so that the part that I was working on, the top part would be wet and salty and pliable, whereas the bottom part was already drying. So it's, you know, you troubleshoot and problem solve as you go along. Yeah.
This is a good question. Do they absorb humidity from the air after they're dry and get smelly? That's what is happening in my house. Very high humidity in Ireland.
Oh, that's interesting. That's a great question. I have not noticed that. I feel that once it's fully dry, it pretty much stays dry, but maybe we have less humidity here. I'm not sure. There's definitely a briny smell to it. I kind of don't mind that. But I think as long as you can stay away from decomposing, you know, then you're good. If there's no bacterial growth, then you're good. Yeah, I'm not quite sure. I don't do anything specific. I don't do anything else than what I mentioned, and I haven't heard any complaints from the Cahun Museum, so I'm good.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we're going to do one more question, and I lost it because here it comes. Here it comes. It was a good one. Let's see. And it was on. Okay. Stunning work. Thank you. I might have missed this, but have you found examples of historical uses of seaweed for baskets by the indigenous peoples of the area?
You know, that is such a great question. And I have looked and looked and looked for that, because I sort of could not imagine that this had not been done before. And I have not found any examples. I would love, if anybody knows of anything like that, if people could send it to me. I did, I think, extensive research. Part of me wonders if it was done at a point in time. Maybe, you know, it clearly would, you know, not really last very long if it, as an artifact, you know, it would just like turn back to soil if you would, you know, if you put it out there. So maybe that's why that there's nothing that has lasted. But yeah, it is hard to imagine, because I was even thinking just the quality of it, you know, when you sew it and then the seaweed dries, you know, and you get this sort of almost sieve effect, like this lacy effect, but also like, you know, you could imagine putting things in it and draining things in it, for instance, from a practical point of view. But yeah, I haven't found anything. I would love to learn about anything like that.
Donna Johnson said, I don't know if I'm going to say this right. Check with the Abbey Museum in Bar Harbor.
Okay. Yeah.
ABBE. Yeah.
Yeah, Van Elbe. Yeah. Also Dutch.
Well, all right. Well, thank you so much, Jeanette.
Thank you again, Jeanette. That was
So
amazing.
good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Underwater forests.
Oh,
People
yeah.
live together.
Thank you so much for having me. And
Absolutely.
thank you, everybody, for tuning
Yeah.
in and giving me part of your Friday. I really appreciate that.
What a
Back
treat.
at you.
That's really amazing. Thank
Yeah.
you. Okay, I have a couple of announcements, and then we will unmute to say hello and goodbye. Jeanette, you're welcome to hang with us. We'll be about 5 more minutes, and then we'll adjourn. So just wanted to remind you that our friend Rachel McHenry of Botanical Tinctoria has generously offered to provide us with a free stitching workshop on the techniques that she uses in her patterns using her threads. I have to say, this would be pretty amazing. So Amy will put the link in the chat. It was also in your Feedback Friday or your weekly emails. And it'll be on this post as well. So join us for that. We also have more patterns and more threads from her. She has 2 types of naturally dyed silk threads, as well as a linen thread that I'm desperately trying to put on the site as a product, but we'll have all of that and some more patterns that we'll have for you later. Also, we have a new ink making workshop with Judy Petit from BioHue. Judy is the amazing artist who puts together all of the inks using our extracts. And she's going to be teaching a workshop in March of 2022. Check that out. Just quickly, next week's presenter, we're so pleased to have them join us. So we're going to have Leslie Harrington and Tess Murdoch of the Color Association of the United States. The Color Association, or CAUS as we call it, is the oldest color forecasting organization, and they use a number of different people who are in both the fashion and the art world in order to come up with the fashion colors that we use on home furnishings, of course, fashion, interiors, and also like office, kind of office colors and layouts and consumables. So check that out. We were really excited to work with them this year. We created the first natural dye color forecast for them, and that has been released to their members. And so Leslie and Tess are going to talk a little bit about that. And we also get access to some of their archives, which span over 100 years. So it's really interesting to look at the history of color in fashion through the eyes of this particular group. So don't miss that. And on top of that, you thought that couldn't get any better. We're planning an after party next week with our dear friend, Abu Bakar Fofana. Abu is going to be joining us either from France or possibly from Bamako, Mali, depending on where he lands. And he'll be showing pieces from his trunk show collection that we've had in the past. He's got some new things as well as some of his beautiful classics. So that'll be right after the Color Association program. So join us for that as well. And Amy, anything else?
Kathy, I put it all in the run of show for you, so I don't have to think about it right now.
I think there's nothing else. I think that was it. Okay, let's go ahead and unmute. Say hello, goodbye. Thank you to Jeanette. If you are on the Cape, check out her exhibition at the Cahoon. It is, in the words of Amy, incredible. So
Yeah, and let me know. I'll come meet you for some coffee. We can go to the Cahoon Museum.
that's right.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Jeanette.
Okay, thank you, Jeanette. It was really great.
Thank you, Jeanette. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeanette.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Inspiring.
Bye.
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 Thank you.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Makes me want to try it.
Thank you all. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Excellent. All right.
Okay, well, that was great. And I
Yes.
am thinking so differently about that rockweed now.
It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
Wow. And there's even a Rockweed organization.
There is?
Yeah.
Yeah, and we'll have all those links.
Yep.
Yeah. There's some really,
Preservation Foundation.
yeah, preservation of the rockweed. And I like that Jeanette's work, when we talked this past week about how much your work is starting to get that, just bringing notice or putting a focus on what is happening with rockweed, and people coming around that with that, oh my God, the harvesting machine with the blades inside it, like just thinking about how delicately you're foraging for it, and these people with big suction things, like
Oh my gosh.
God help me. Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, yeah, it's just, I think as long, in general, I think small scale is always better, you know, I think individuals working with, you know, what's there in nature around them is wonderful. I think when big corporations start coming in, that's where we, I think, go
That's
off.
where we get into trouble.
Yeah,
Always.
that's where the trouble
Always.
starts.
Definitely get into trouble. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
All right.
Well, should
Okay.
we should end on a happier note though, about suctioning machines with blades slicing rockweed off of rocks, and think about the beautiful rockweed.
yeah.
I know
The-
that dance that it does.
the dancing
So
rockweed
beautiful.
and the cold waters of Maine and the sequestering carbon.
Yeah.
Can we
Yeah,
use the
I
weed on the
think
west
so many
coast?
people see the rockweed as sort of, you know, this nasty, smelly thing that gets in the way of, you know, enjoying the beach. I think if we can just get to a point where people see it as the underwater forest, then we can deal with some of this stuff that, you know, that washes up and, you know, so just, yeah, not want to clean it up so much.
Right.
It's there for a reason. Yeah.
Yeah.
The colors are so beautiful. When I was there last September on out on Deer Isle, it was like the hues of the yellow, the gold,
The
that golden
gold.
color and the light. It's just
And the
so
fall,
inspiring. It's so
in the
gorgeous.
fall, it's just stunning, I find.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah.
All right. That's a better end, right?
Yeah, much better. Don't you all feel better now?
Yeah, I do.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. No more yeah. We have enough on our plates, I would
We
say.
have enough on our plates. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, you guys. I have got to run. Amy is driving up to Maine as we speak.
Well, not as we speak, because that would be weird. I'd be like this with my computer,
That's right.
but
Safe travels.
Yeah.
thank you.
All right. So
Get
tune
the
in next
recording
week.
going, too.
Oh yeah, hit recording. I'm hitting the stop. Okay, it is stopped.